heating pads. They are super useful when it's cold. You can put them under the covers in your bed to warm it up so you're not just freezing for ages until your body heat finally starts kicking into that blanket. They are great for muscle cramps, muscle pain, you know, heat therapy. That's what I use it for mostly. And it's actually really simple to make yourself a heating pad out of some fabric and rice. You do something like this, where you just take some fabric and you make a little pouch and you stuff it full of rice, stick it in the microwave for a couple minutes, boom, instant heating pad. And this is so simple. This is a homemade one. You can make it out of whatever fabric you want. They're cute, they're easy. That's great. There are a couple things that you have to keep in mind, like the type of material is actually important. You want it to be a tight knit, as opposed to, here I have an example of a failed heating pad here. We tried a little while back to make a heating pad out of just like an old tank top. Just sewed a bunch into it, stuffed some rice in there. But the problem with this is, first of all, it's a lot of rice, so it's kind of heavy. It stretches it out. And this being a knit material, the threading actually stretches until there's holes in all the seams, and then the rice could actually start coming out of there. So we were using this for a while, and then all the rice was spilling out, and pouring a bunch of rice into the bed, which is not what we want. So a nice tight knit fabric, no holes. So I decided to make myself a heat pack. And of course, because I can't just ever make anything simple, instead of making a nice little rectangle with a cute fabric the way that we usually do, I decided I'm gonna make him look like Gudetama. So I was thinking it would just be pretty easy. I'd just make a usual rectangle, but I'd have little nubs for legs and for arms. And it ended up not being that simple. I instead went down this rabbit hole of designing. I was just trying out all these different things with paper. I was trying to make myself a little pattern for this guy. I watched all these videos of people making heating pads and beanbag chairs and plushies and socks because I saw a video of someone making a Gudetama plushie out of a sock, and then I was like, oh, because of the heel. And then I had to watch a bunch of videos about how to make socks because I had to figure out how to make the heel. And it was just a big mess, especially considering I'm not really using a stretchy fabric, so that makes things a little more difficult. I made a whole bunch of practice things. These little, here's a little guy like that. I had all these silly little dudes. This one, I tried to do a stitching that my mom taught me about, where you stitch parallel lines along a curve and pull one of them so that all the gather ends up on the inside. I had no idea what she was talking about, but I tried my best. I got this little dude, sort of looks like the frog Walla from Naruto. You know, I was just like trying a whole bunch of things. Eventually, what I came up with was this little dude that I made out of paper here. He has a little flap at his butt and on his head, but he generally has the sort of idea that I'm thinking of where I wanted most of his bulk to be on one side and the legs and arms to be all the way at the bottom instead of just, you know, coming from his whole body like that. So this is the blueprint I came up with, and now it's time to put it into action. So I just grabbed this yellow fabric to use. Luckily for me, this fabric scrap came already as a long rectangle. It had been folded into 6 even parts, so I didn't really bother ironing it out. I could use these as a guideline for my measurements. Now, the 6 parts are a little too wide for dealing with this little guy, so if I just go ahead and sort of fold those all in half again, and make myself little halfway mark guidelines, you can see that the way I have this laid out on this little dude, the parts that get turned into the bubble of the head and butt are sort of like 2 parts and then a 3rd part for the rest of the head. Same over here. 2 parts for his butt there, another part for the remainder of his butt, and then I have another sort of like 2 parts for the legs. I said I had to remember, and I already forgot that there's the arms. So this is gonna have to get even skinnier, I think, after I carve out some space for the arms here. So let's just like mark this up a little bit. I guess from the ends of where the arm is, which is getting a little skinny, isn't it? That's getting a little skinny. I don't know if I like that. What's going to happen is that this is going to be sewn together like that. This is going to come down and sew together here. The problem I had here was that I forgot about leaving the arm space when I was measuring this earlier. So maybe I can have him kind of go in and then out. Oh, but what about the head? Let's cut out some arms and work around the space we end up having left. We have the problem of this no longer lining up here. So this is going to have to be trimmed probably. I have to cut this excess off, I think. Unless we just want to make his butt a little fatter than his head, because that's sort of how he sits. Alright, and there you have a basic top of the body shape. So the next thing to do is to sew this together. All right, layout. So I'm basically going to pin this sort of into the proper shape before I sew it. Here we've got his little butt area. These curves match up with each other. So I'm just going to pin this on either side. The next item is that these are supposed to line up with each other. So you can see what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick up the top part of this body and sort of turn it this way so that this ends up just lying flush with that there. Again, I'm just going to rotate this. There we go. That's like that. There's a bunch of excess over here, but that's all right. We want that. I'm just going to pin this in place. All right, and I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. So there's the flat end down there. And this is going to rotate so that it lines up. And I'll pin it in place. Now, his little butt area kind of looks like this. So you got a little flap up here. Here's his legs sticking out at the bottom, and you can see the body now starts to form. I'm going to do the same thing with his head. Pin the curves together. Twist this extra fabric so that it sort of lines up. So you can sort of see the basic shape of what this guy's going to look like here. Now I have my ends all sewn up. I'm just going to turn him back right side out so we can see how that worked. It's got a bit of a booty. I'm thinking I might actually want to make this less severe. Less severe of a butt, less severe of a head. So to do that, I'm just going to turn it back. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this large flap, but I'm actually just going to sew another line that's just, you know, a little shorter. Cut them down a little. Let's see. Oh yes, that's much more subtle. Do the same thing on the head side. That looks a bit more reasonable, I think. So we can trim off this excess fabric in here, keep it from getting in the way. Alright, before I add a base, I have to give him a face. Now, my friends and I have this joke about no glue. And for some reason, I still hold myself to that all these years later. So I'm going to try to embroider a face on here. I've never done this before, so we'll see how that goes. But hopefully it'll turn out all right. So I've got my black thread, I've got my white thread, and we'll see how this goes. And here's his embroidered little face. Alright, so we've got to make the base of this guy now. For the bottom, I'm using this fabric that I found. It's actually a different fabric because, like I said, I'm just using scraps, but it's pretty much the same color. It'll work fine. So the next step is just going to be to sew all along here. So he's all set together. Alright, so I have now sewn entirely all the way around the edges of this guy. Normally, when you do this, you would leave a gap somewhere that's not sewn so that you have space to turn it inside out. In this case, I'm not doing that because what I'm going to do is actually create a new gap right here on his butt, because you can't have Gudetama without a butt crack, am I right? Turn him inside out. Skinny areas like the arms and legs, you're going to want to trim off the excess fabric as much as you can, just so that it's easier to turn them inside out again. Not exactly professional quality here, but alright, time to fill them up with rice. I'm actually going to use the rice that is in the failed t-shirt bag, which is brown rice, and because brown rice tends to have a little bit of a weird smell when you heat it up, which doesn't bother me too much, but it does bother my mom, I know. I'm actually going to also try mixing it with a little basmati rice and, you know, the same concept that people make sachets and stuff out of lavender and whatnot. I thought I'd use something like that. I don't have any lavender readily available, unfortunately, so I just grabbed some spices out of the spice drawer that don't smell too bad, and I'll mix those in too, and hopefully it'll work out. So now we've just got to close them, sew them closed. My mom taught me this nice invisible stitch that you can use to sort of pull your seams shut cleanly. You kind of poke in on the outside and then in on the outside in sort of parallel lines. You're making these parallel lines, sort of like a little ladder looking effect, and then when you pull the thread tight, it pulls all the fabric in and gives you a nice clean seam like that. Alright, it's not the cleanest stitch job there, but it's this little butt. Looks a little more like some kind of monster from a Miyazaki movie than a Gudetama. He's like a mediocre Tama. I'm probably gonna have to sew up a couple spots where my stitching might come loose, like because the thread kept ripping. You're at his... But here I can see a little spot at the arm where I sewed a little too close. So a little repair work is probably going to be necessary as I notice them, but overall, not too bad. Just came out of the microwave. He's nice and warm. Smells like rosemary. I hope that this was informative for you guys. You can apply my methods to make any sort of weird little Ghibli creature that you want now. Nope. Just felt some rice fall out onto my leg. Gonna have to find that hole. Nope, it's his butt. Gonna sew that up. Stay warm, guys.